Happy Monday. This is Workforce Priorities. The conversation continues. So we're going to talk about using human resources to support organizational health and resilience. And my name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I'm from NIAPRS, and NIAPRS is one of the MCTAC partners. I'm joined today by my colleague, Eve Addis.
Hi.
So hi, Eve. This presentation has been put together by several of the MCTAC partners, and including NIAPRS, the New York Association for Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, the Coalition for Behavioral Health, and ASAP. There we go. Okay, so the slides are going to be posted on the MCTAC CTAC website. We encourage questions, and we actually say that questions that aren't addressed will be reviewed and incorporated into further presentations. But this isn't your normal presentation. This is more of a meeting, and we're going to have more of a conversation instead of Eve and I sort of talking to you. It's more about talking with you. So what is MCTAC? If you're new to MCTAC or this is one of your first trainings with MCTAC, our overall goal is to prepare and assist providers with the transition to Medicaid managed care. And MCTAC is a training, consultation, and educational resource center that offers resources to all mental health and substance use disorder providers throughout New York State. So again, this is just our partner slide, and these are the partners that are responsible for the content and development of this information and this offering. And this offering comes to you through ICL. ICL put together a Workforce Priorities series, webinar series. So we thought it would be a good idea to kind of follow that series up with a meeting, if you will. And since we couldn't do them live and regionally, we decided to try Zoom regional meetings. So we hope that we'll sort of take this opportunity to work together and talk together and have conversations about the content today. Learning objectives. So we really have three sort of main learning objectives for you today, and we hope that you will be able to broaden your self-awareness of your own organization's culture after coming to today's meeting, because the focus really will be around organizational culture. To identify at least one actionable item, one thing for you to begin to address as part of your organization's culture, and to think about how you can be better prepared to face external factors that could contribute to your culture. So again, we want you to be a part of the discussion. We want this to be active and live because we're very live, right, Eve?
We're very live, especially for a Monday.
That's right. So we want you to unmute your phone and we want you to join the conversation. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can certainly use the chat box. You can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you have difficulty doing that. Oh, by the way, in order to unmute your phone, just in case you don't know how to use Zoom, if you hover your mouse over the lower bottom of your lower left of your screen, you should see an audio icon, whether that's a microphone or a telephone, depending on how you've joined the meeting, and you can just click on that to unmute or mute yourself. And we do ask, while you're not speaking though, if you could
stay muted.
Just stay muted just to minimize the background noise, because we know many folks are working from home and it may not be the quietest place sometimes. So before we get started, any questions? Okay. All right, so then let's just get straight into it. Let's start by chatting. We don't have a ton of folks on the phone, so which is nice, because that'll give us the opportunity to talk a little bit more than if we had like 20 people on the phone or on the computer. So let's start with a little introduction. Tell us what your name is, where you work, if you feel comfortable sharing that. But really what we want to know is what you hope to get out of the conversation today. So I think what I'm going to do is just go down the line based on my participant list here. So Brad, you're up first if you feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah. Hi,
awesome.
I'm Brad from the ARC Jefferson St. Lawrence in Canton, New York. Looking forward to hearing how other people are dealing with things as we continue.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us. Stashana or Karen? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, Stashana's there.
Hello, everyone. Bear with me, I'm not feeling too well today. But my name is Tashana Parkinson. I currently work at Well Life Network in Quorum as a mental health social worker. And what brought me here today is I do try to participate in at least one webinar each day as I am working remotely today. What I hope to get is just any information that I could pass on to my clients. I'm always looking for different resources that I can help connect them with, whether it's within their community or any virtual support that I could provide for them. So just here to learn and just get as much as I can. I've participated in a lot of the MedTech webinars in the past, and I've always found it helpful.
All right,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Easter, and I've been for decades the director of Reach Out of St. Lawrence County. Excuse me, we do crisis services. We've run a crisis hotline for approaching 50 years and for 25 years, a mobile crisis team. We have a beautiful culture actually at Reach Out, which has been gravely threatened by COVID. When we have both young people, mostly college students, who are aspiring to social work or counseling or psychology careers, who come to volunteer and we train them. But there are 5 of us in the organization, including our entire mobile crisis team, who have more than 30 years of experience. And the remote operation that's been required by COVID has really trashed our culture because we lost most of our college student volunteers when they were sent home. So anyway, I'm really interested in the idea of organizational culture, and we're looking to preserve and rebuild.
Awesome. Awesome. Sorry to hear about what you've been going through, but hopefully we could be here to help you a little bit. We did have a couple folks just join while we were doing introductions. So just so you folks know, the new folks that are on the line, we're just going around because we do have quite a small group, which is nice. Just getting to know each other a little bit. Talking about what you hope to get out of the conversation today and what your name might be. So thank you, Karen. Let's move on to Susan H. And you may not have a microphone. If you don't, that's quite all right. You could chat your answer in, or we can move on.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I was on mute. I'm back.
That's okay. Go for it.
I'm Susan Haggett. I'm the Human Resource Corporate Compliance Manager at an agency in Syracuse called Launch. We were formerly the Learning Disabilities Association of Central New York, and we rebranded a few years ago. And I guess the reason for my interest in this is that I've been kind of thrust into trying to guide the agency through what everybody knows has been a pretty tough time. And, you know, it was relatively new to me. So I just kind of want to hear what you guys have to say. And I kind of agree with the last caller that just introduced themselves about how remote working is really putting a strain on our agency. We're a very small agency, and it's putting a bit of a strain, I think, on our culture.
Absolutely. Elaine.
What about Diwa?
Well, I was going to get to her.
Oh, okay.
Or him or her, actually. I should.
Okay, I just don't. She's next on my list. So anyway, I just don't want people to think we're skipping over them. That's all.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, who is this?
Perfect. This is Diwa. Hello. So I just signed up for this training just to see what information and resources I can or information I can receive from you guys and to utilize it with the families that I work with. I work with Cayuga Centers as a home health case manager or caseworker. So a lot of times we help with families who are in crises to help them out with any kind of resources and services we can in terms of like food and housing and all that stuff.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
All right, so now can I get to Elaine?
Okay.
Elaine, you may be muted
Are
if
you
you're trying
there?
to speak. Otherwise, we can move on. The last person actually does not have a name written. It's just a phone number, so I'm not sure if that's a duplicate or not. But if there's anyone else that hasn't had the opportunity to speak that would like to, please feel free and introduce yourself. Otherwise, we can get into the contents for today.
Okay.
Okay, great. So first things first, organizational health. We thought we'd start with sort of giving you a little bit of a background on what organizational health, what does it really mean, and for all intents and purposes today, what is the definition of organizational health? So, Eve, did you want to start us off?
I will. Thank you. So you see the graphic of the stethoscope on this slide, and we kind of think about an organization as an organism, a living organism, and actually we often talk about the soul or the heart of organizations. So the idea of looking at the health of an organization is important because it tells us a lot. And one of the measures, we have kind of two buckets of measures. So we have static measures. So much like we would take a pulse or a heart rate, if we were checking on the health of a human being, some of these measures are ways to check on the health of an organization. So first is financial revenue, the financial status, the financial health of the organization, and does the organization have revenue to support its operations and to support its mission, basically. Then another measure is compliance, and here it's really all about the organizations being able to keep up with the regulations and complying has policies that comply with those regs, and it meets stakeholder expectations. And so here we have an area that is measurable, and certainly all of you know that because if you've had to go through audits by your funders or payers, then you understand all about compliance. Workforce competence, that's another measure, is the workforce that's out there, presumably for the purpose of carrying out the mission of the organization. Does it have the skills? Is it a competent workforce? And the last two have to do with feedback. And first is, do consumers, the people who receive services, are they satisfied with the organization? And all of you, I'm sure, have some sort of consumer satisfaction survey that provides you and informs you about that. And then workforce satisfaction. And that's related to competence, of course, but it has its own value in knowing is your workforce, is the organization's workforce satisfied, because a satisfied workforce is related to workforce productivity, and that then has an impact on consumer satisfaction. So these things are all related, but they're ways to kind of take the temperature, if you will, of an organization's health. And then we have dynamic measures. And by dynamic, I mean that, these are sort of more movable. These are more kind of changing all the time. And the first one is the alignment of organizational values, missions, and aspirations across the organizational hierarchy, which is another way of saying, does everybody in their organization, from the executive suite all the way to the folks who are on the front lines, do they all share the same values? Are they all there to accomplish the same goals? And do they all have the same hopes with regard to the work that they do. This is a very important part of health, because if it's sort of like saying in a human body, if all the organs and if everything in the body doesn't work in unison, then you're going to have a big health problem. So alignment is a very key factor of health in organizations. The second is adaptation. Is the organization capable of responding to external factors and some internal factors? So this is about this is kind of a Darwinian thought about the species that survive over the course of time are the species that are able to adapt to the changes in their environment. So adaptation is also here, again, a very dynamic measure of organizational health. And then the last one has to do with safety. And safety here is sort of a factor that has a tremendous impact in the ability, its impact has to do with folks who work in the organization, and are they preoccupied with their safety, or are they free to do the work that they were there presumably to do, which is to pursue the organizational mission. And safety is on three levels: the physical safety, which means the physical environment, which certainly I think we can all understand now with COVID what that means. And secondly, personal safety. Do you as an individual who works in an organization feel personally safe from all sorts of assaults? And I'm not talking about physical assaults, but there's all sorts of safety that one feels with regard to the relationships in the environment, and also certainly one's just sense of comfort in working for a particular organization. And relational safety has to do with both within the organization and external to the organization. Does one feel safe in relationships? And these are relationships that are with colleagues or relationships with supervisors and managers. So safety, adaptation, and alignment stand out as sort of more dynamic measures of organizational health. So when we talk about the environment here, let's sort of break it down to include, again, the physical space, the personal environments, and the relational environments. I already spoke about these three, but I think that folks need to keep in mind that that a safe environment or safety as just a general idea relates to physical space, personal space, and relational space. Okay, are there any questions so far in terms of understanding what we mean by organizational health and how we can measure it? Okay, let's move on then to resilience. And resilience is sometimes people talk about it as the ability to bounce back. And so that's exactly what it is. And it speaks to that idea of adaptation. When something happens, when there's a sudden impact, an unforeseen event or situation, and I think that some of you in your introduction spoke about, the impact of COVID and how it impacted your organizations in a negative way. And I want to say that, there is a kind of, we're all going through this now at the same time, right? So we're all going through a collective experience. And the impact of COVID has really affected everyone on a variety of levels, personal levels and also, the organizational level. So an example, other than certainly COVID, is when we are dealing with budget cuts or other events like, climate events, floods, fire, things like that, where we have to kind of move very quickly in order to continue doing the work that we do in spite of the impact that we're faced with. In order to succeed in those times is the organization's ability to be nimble, flexible, and agile. So how does nimbleness, if you will, flexibility and agility translate to a workforce? What makes a workforce nimble, flexible, and agile? And so we talked about some of those things before when we talked about alignment, right? So if everybody in the organization is on the same page about what they do and what their goals and objectives are, it's much easier to adapt, because it's much easier to move quickly, to move the needle quickly, and to do what needs to get done in order to continue the work. Now, this doesn't apply in all cases, of course, and as some of you mentioned in your introductions, I think somebody mentioned that their volunteer workforce disappeared because of COVID. Sometimes, I don't want to make it appear that, there's always nimbleness, flexibility, and agility always works to resolve or to become adaptable. But in most instances, and we've seen it in terms of COVID and how organizations were able to shift and were able to move their workforce around, and they were able to adapt to virtual service delivery. The other thing is when you have a sudden situation and you have to respond to it and adapt, it's very important that decisions are made quickly. I mean, sometimes, something happens and you've got to make a decision very quickly. And it's important in those instances for power in the organization to be shared, so that everything doesn't come from one individual, or where every decision has to be made by consensus across the complex hierarchy, but more so that managers who are in positions of decision making can make decisions within the parameters of their positions. So, if people are afraid to make decisions, or afraid to take risks, or afraid to make mistakes, there's a likelihood that things will stall, because nobody will want to make a decision until there's agreement across the board. And stalling, or the inability to act in situations where action and quick action is important, can be very detrimental to the organization and to the people that depend on the organization for whatever the organization provides. So it's swift action is the issue here. And how does an organization, the organization's resilience, it's based on its ability to act swiftly. And finally, which has to do with alignment again, is that communication is aligned, that it's clear, it's frequent, it's transparent, that people trust the communication that they're receiving. And they trust it because they know that everyone in the organization is operating from the same information and is coming from a place that they believe is giving them the right guidance. So and this happened also around COVID, where we've heard of organizations having huddles very frequently during the day because everybody was working from virtually, check-ins, and the kind of thing that really made a difference in people having, I guess, the information they needed to act, again, swiftly and to act in unison.
And Eve, just to mention here, the questions that we came up with, about being nimble, flexible, agile, about making decisions, about swift action and communication, those were all taken from something called the Organizational Culture Assessment Questionnaire, which is like I think it's a 2-page tool or resource rather, that we've included the link to at the end of the slide presentation. And it's just something that we think might be helpful for you guys if you want to take a look at it. You could certainly do fill out the questionnaire yourselves. You could ask a group of individuals, across the executive team to fill out the questionnaire and sort of see if you all sort of think the same thing about your organizational health or your organizational culture rather. see if you're all on the same page, that kind of thing. But it's a nice tool just to sort of
Yeah.
help you take a look at your organizational culture.
Yeah, it's a checklist, and it would be interesting, to use it and see whether there's agreement across, a variety of levels in the organization and how people what do people check off. But it's also a good tool to start a conversation. So if from
Absolutely.
this webinar, you want to start a conversation to have the entire organization increase its awareness of its culture and of its health and resilience, then it's a good tool to start off a conversation across the organization.
Absolutely. And Tara actually just put the link into the chat box for you. So if you want to take a quick look at it or just copy paste it into your browser for later, you can certainly do that. All right, so before we move into the next section on HR's role in promoting organizational health and supporting organizational health, let's do a quick check-in. Any questions so far? Feel free to unmute yourselves or use the chat box.
Any comments? You may not have questions, but maybe you have comments about what we've just gone over, and maybe you can share a story or an idea that some of what we've said brings to mind.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
This is Karen. I just wanted to say, in terms of our being nimble, right now I could divide things into two halves: the current survival issues and then the longer term goals. We had never worked remotely before. We had no tools for working remotely. And in 3 days, we began to work remotely with all the tools in place. I worked 20 hours a day for 3 days to make that happen. And 3 days later, we could send everyone home. We figured out how to replace our volunteer time, because our colleges sent our volunteers home if they were college students, and most of them could not work from home because loud and family and all of that. And then we had the big budget cut, and from the day that I learned that we were getting roughly a 20% budget cut to the next day, our staff, our board, and I had met, discussed everything, come to the decisions about the cuts, and made the exact cuts. We specifically knew what we were going to cut within 24 hours, and we made that decision together. So in terms of keeping things afloat through this pandemic, the critical mission of our agency, we've been able to do that. We're serving 3 times as many serious crisis calls cases as our normal monthly amounts right now. And we're doing it with much less staff, much less money. It's tiring. But on the other hand, some goals that we've had that we've been working on for years, we're a crisis hotline, and we would like to be part of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which requires many steps. And we were almost at the point where we could begin to serve Northern New York for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Right now, that has totally gone out the window because we just can't cope with that. We don't have the number of volunteers that we can cope with taking on more of that. More of Northern New York suicide calls through the Lifeline. We also were midway through planning to begin to be able to bill Medicaid for our professional mobile crisis team. And we have no time to think about that at all. If we want to stay, we have a choice between staying afloat right now to live to fight another day and trying to make progress on those longer term goals, which are also important. So that was just a comment that I had on the topic of resilience and nimble action.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, because I think that there's a lot sort of between the lines of everything that you said there. But it seems to me that, you know, you're all very clear about what your roles are and what your objectives are. And, you know, I understand you're a small organizations, and sometimes, you know, it's basically because you're small that you're able to do everything that you've done to continue doing what you're doing. And that, you know, you could get everybody together, you could make those decisions. Once you get into a certain size of an organization, that becomes much more difficult because you may have competing imperatives, and things get much more. So I would say that you're also a very conflict-free organization. Probably, it sounds like that you're very clear in what you're saying about, you know, what you have to let go, what you have to keep, and you've adapted in order to continue doing what your mission has basic. And it's also another thing that comes across is your passion for what you're doing, which is sort of hard to measure. It's hard to measure passion, but it would be somewhere in the slide, if you will, before that. Maybe we should have put passion in there too. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
All right, so let's get into the next section on HR's role. So I love this photo, this picture up front here on the front slide, the title slide, just because I think it has a really good representation of all of the different roles that HR plays in the workforce, or with the workforce, I should say, because it really is about joining the workforce and being part of, and just to go back to the reference with the stethoscope, sort of taking the pulse of the workforce. And so it's about recruiting and performance and training and leadership, and we're gonna sort of get into all of those things. Okay, let me advance the slide. All right, so first things first. Actually, not first things first. I have a question for you. So we heard from the group at the beginning when you're sort of introducing yourselves. I heard one person say that their role is HR and quality improvement, if I recall correctly. And then I'm just wondering if other folks know, for their organization, is there a dedicated HR person whose sole position is to, you know, do the human resources aspect? Do you outsource your human resources, or is it, you know, a shared responsibility for someone along with another aspect of their job? So if you guys could use the chat box and just type in what your experience has been at your organization, that'll give Eve and I a better idea of, you know, who's in the room with us today and where we want to take the material, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, Susan is an HR person. Susan is an HR person. So it's basically asking the other folks, do you have a special person that does that job, or is it part of a job, another job that somebody has?
Right. Or do you outsource it? Do you just, you know, do you pay an HR consulting firm perhaps to come and do your HR? Because I think it's important for us to know that. It's important to think about the different aspects of HR. If you have a dedicated staff person, it's their, you know, that's their only job, right? And it's a big job. If you're outsourcing your HR, then you have to think about how do you integrate that HR consultant into your organization, and how do you make them part of the culture, and how do you address things that way? So thank you. Someone just typed in, Stacy just typed in, they have their own HR department. Great. So you have, that means more than one person, right? A department.
Yeah, HR is part of my job. We have our own HR department. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, who's also the executive director. Exactly. We have 3 people. Okay, 3 people is a department. That's pretty good. And then the other thing is, you know, HR, sometimes HR takes care of sort of everything, and sometimes HR could also do payroll as well, or sometimes finance does payroll. So you have to really think about, you know, who your HR person or people are and what their job responsibilities are. But we do think no matter how you do your HR, we do really believe rather that the HR person or people have to be part of the executive team. They have to be able to make a high, they have to be in a high level decision-making position. They have to have a direct line to the CEO or the executive director, and if there is a COO or deputy director. And then they have to be able to bridge the communication between the C-suite level folks and the frontline staff folks. So that's one aspect of HR. The other aspect or function of HR is how to get staff, how to hire staff, and how to onboard staff. So recruitment, hiring, and onboarding. HR's role really is in making sure that, or part of HR's role is making sure that the people that are coming in, that are being brought into the building just for, even for an interview, are consistent and match the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And you're going to hear even I use the word consistency a lot, I think, today, because we do really believe that it's important to sort of do that matching. Internal communication, what's the language that we're using? Are we using language that's compatible or consistent with the mission, vision, and values? How do we make decisions? Do we make decisions using data? So I think it's really important to make decisions using data. If I'm an HR generalist or if I'm the HR director, I need to know what health outcomes are we looking for the folks we're providing services to. How do I get feedback from those people about the services? How do I get feedback from the staff providing those services so that I can figure out what training needs are for the workforce? All of those things make a whole lot of sense as far as getting information and sharing information. And that goes back, again, I think, to the communication aspect.
Let me just say one other thing about data. And, these things are all, of course, connected. But data has also to do with people at the executive level have, especially today, have to have a lot of data in order to understand how to lead and where to put the effort and where not to put the effort and what's working and what isn't working. Well, the HR department, because they're involved with recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, have to know this because they may have a staffing pattern in a particular program that where there's a vacancy, but data could indicate that maybe filling that vacancy is not the best thing to do because there's a certain aspect of the data that leads one to another reality, which is part of that division or part of that particular business entity is showing something's missing or something is wrong in a particular area, and maybe rather than fill a position in an area that's doing very well, you may have to fill a position to provide a role or a function in an area that isn't doing that well. So, when if an HR director is kept in the dark around this data and around this information, they are less likely to make the kinds of human resource decisions that are going to be helpful for the organization to pursue its objectives and to achieve its mission.
Eve, you make a lot of sense, and we actually did this training last week for a different region of the state, and you gave a really good example of that. Do you want to maybe share that example just to sort of give it a little more life for people about the CASAC?
Oh, yeah. It turned out that a particular organization had was finding that when they were looking at their data and they were providing they were using certain best practices in a department that was serving people with both mental health and substance use disorders. So people who had co-occurring disorders, and what they found is that particular division was people were dropping out of treatment or people were missing a lot of appointments. So they were getting all this data, and what they found when they looked at more deeply is that they really needed another KSAC, another certified substance abuse counselor in that division, because somehow they were losing a lot of traction with the folks who had the co-occurring disorders. And so the human resources department in that instance, there was an opening for a mental health counselor. And the human resources said, well, based on the data that I'm getting and that I'm receiving, I think that we need to switch out the mental health counselor and get somebody in there who has more experience in working with people with substance use disorders. They would not have been able to make that decision if they did not have the data that to support making that decision. And of course, it was the right decision.
Right, exactly. Thank you. All right, so here we go with the word consistency again. So is what you're marketing, is the service that you're telling people you provide, and what we're calling, so basically it's the employee journey, what we're calling the employment experience that your staff has. Is it consistent? So is your brand or what you market and your employment experience, what it's actually like to work there, is that consistent? So when I come for an interview and I've read your job description, I've read your job posting, I think it's a great match for me, and I think it's a great match for what I want to be doing and what I'm, trained to do and skilled to do. When I come in and actually do the work, is it really what you're telling me it is, right? Am I doing what I was hired to do? And honestly, in a way that I was hired to do it, right? Is it consistent with the organization's mission, vision, and values? Do the employees that I work with, do my coworkers, do we all sort of behave in a way that's aligned with our mission? Is it really a competitive sort of culture, or is it a really laid back culture, which may not be a good thing either? So you have to sort of, figure out what the best fit is, I think, and make sure that your mission, vision, and values aligns with what your culture is, and that you're bringing in the people that align with those things as well. Because if you don't hire and onboard staff in a way that sort of helps them fit into the culture, then they're not going to stay, and you're going to have an issue with workforce retention, which is a whole other issue that we'll get to a little bit later, because it's actually very expensive to keep hiring staff. It's actually more expensive to keep hiring staff than it is to keep staff there and train them and help them move up.
Just remember here,
just
remember here, I'm sorry, Daniela, but just remember here that there's something about disappointing people. If you're going to say that working in your program, in your organization is going to be X, and people come on and they're not really seeing that and they're not experiencing that, then basically you have a disappointed employee. And a disappointed employee could stay with you for a long time, but you're not going to get the kind of, initiative and passion and productivity from a disappointed employee. And I have to tell you, I've worked with organizations where there are a lot of disappointed employees because they thought they were joining an organization that was one way, but when they came to the organization and started working there, it really wasn't the case. So that's a morale issue, and people talk about morale a lot, and staff morale, how to improve staff morale. Well, it begins right there. It begins with the consistency between, what you say you're going to, the environment that you're going to provide folks, if you will, getting back to the earlier part of the presentations, and then what happens when people are there. And an HR person, by the way, can gauge that. And they can help the organization achieve that consistency.
And I think it's also important, we always say first impressions mean a lot, right? So if you're sort of let down right off the bat, what does that do for that new staff person's morale? And then if the general morale of the staff is pretty low, it certainly doesn't help things when the new person isn't as jazzed as they could be, if you're trying to change culture, for example. because culture is contagious. I said this the other day, and I actually really liked the phrase. You know, it's one thing if you have culture that you really like and you're trying to keep that culture and maintain that culture. It's still work to maintain a healthy and positive, you know, workforce culture. And it's just as much work, I think, to change culture, right? Because you can't stay stagnant and do nothing for your staff and hope that their morale stays as good as it is, because it won't. You've got to work both ways. You've got to work to like improve culture and make changes to culture, and you've got to work to maintain culture. So something just came into
Yeah,
the chat
Karen
box.
wrote in,
Yeah.
she said, one of my younger volunteers who just graduated from college recently took a job that was advertised as a counseling job at a residential treatment program. She was really excited about having a chance to do counseling. She was assigned to night shift. So far, she has done laundry and not seen a client who was awake. She is not happy.
Wow.
Well, great
Wow.
example.
I don't blame
Thank
her.
you. Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's
so talk
perfect.
about transparency. That's a good lead into transparency, right?
Right. Thank you.
So what do your job descriptions look like? You know, are they actually what, that's one sort of way to define transparency. Are your job descriptions an accurate representation of the actual job, right?
Right.
Transparency, I think, also has to do with communication, which we touched on a little bit earlier. Sort of being able to say, this is why we need to make this change, if you need to be making a change, for example. Helping staff to feel safe, not just in the physical environment of safety, but also safe to share opinions, safe to, you know, talk about a religious practice that they have or a culture, safe in so many different ways. I mean, we could probably have a whole training or conversation on safety in and of itself, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, looking at the consistency across the organizational hierarchy. Is it reflective of the community that you serve? You know, looking at everything from culture, race, ethnicity, educational background. I mean, we could go on. And to be quite honest, there are a lot of resources around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not going to get to touch on much of that today, but we do encourage you to start thinking about it if you haven't already. There's some resources through CTAC. There's some resources through some of our other partners, and you can certainly look into those things as well. All right, any questions, comments around HR functions before we move on? We had some new folks join in the meantime, so welcome to you folks. Just a reminder, you know, this is about having a conversation with you all, so feel free to unmute yourselves, join the conversation, ask questions, you know, make comments, give some examples if you've got them. We'd love to hear from you. Use the chat box if you don't want to unmute yourself as well. That's another option.
So,
okay.
The steps for maintaining a healthy and resilient organizational culture. So that's sort of the how do we do this? How do we keep it if we have it? Okay, so these are kind of, you know, things you can do. And to start with, review your employee manual to ensure that it is consistent with your brand and what you promise employees. You know, organizations change, but very often some of the tools they use to orient their staff, orient new staff on board, new staff doesn't. And much like, you know, job descriptions that very often stay the way they've been, although the job has clearly changed. An organization needs to kind of look at their employee policies and procedures and their job descriptions and their websites as well, because that's sometimes how people come to an organization, to make sure that all those things are consistent with what your organization's values and brand is. The other thing is, the last slide ended with equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I have to say that there has to be a deliberate effort in this regard. This isn't something that I think, and especially today, that we can address casually. There has to be some really deliberate effort and planning around how to achieve equity, diversity, and inclusion in an organization. So other than that, it should be reflective of the communities in which services are delivered. It's also important that whoever is working in an organization feels that their, whatever it is that they bring in terms of their identity, that it's going to be respected, that it's going to be valued, and that it's going to be safe for them to be working in that organization. And as has been said, Daniela made a point of saying that diversity is not only in terms of race and ethnicity, but it's also in terms of the diversity of person's educational background, culture, and lived experience. So think about it in this broader term. And finally, a healthy and resilient organization is one where the workforce has the skills to deliver the services that yield the organization's desired outcomes. So again, here it's a matter of having the data and the information to know what training, what skills does our workforce need to have in order to get the organization to be excellent in its service delivery and in terms of the outcomes, the health outcomes of the people it serves. So there's a and we stated that earlier, there is that relationship between, what the data tells you about outcomes and how that gets translated into the resources and the skill set that the organization needs to achieve those outcomes.
And I think another thing is, oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to start talking about workforce retention strategies. So it's a lot of work to get your staff and to get the workforce that you want and the workforce that is representative of your mission, vision, and values. But it's another thing to keep them, right? I think I had said that earlier. It's just as much work to get those folks in the door as it is to keep them in the door. So we recommend a couple of things. One is a wellness plan, taking care of your staff. What can you do to take care of your workforce? And that could be so many things, right? It could mean, having an EAP. It can mean having a great health plan or benefit plan. It can mean behavioral health wellness, offering things of that nature to your staff. It can mean a ton of things. And I would actually like to open it up to the group and ask, what do you guys experience as wellness and workforce retention strategies as far as wellness? Does your organization offer you anything to help you stay well? Just thinking about, while you're typing in, just thinking about COVID, for example, flexible schedules, for example, for folks that may have kids that need homeschool help. We may not all live in a place where the internet is so great, or you have more than one device to do work from home and help your kids go to school. Are you able to offer electronic devices like laptops or iPads or some kind of tool to help your staff work from home? All of those things feed into a wellness strategy, right? Because it helps your staff feel good about doing the job that they're doing, which makes them want to continue to do it. So curious to hear from you guys what your wellness strategies might include or might be.
Right, and think about wellness also in another way. Think about as the antidote to burnout. So we have a very high burnout. We have a very high burnout rate in our community, and that's because we expose our staff to a lot of stressors in the work that they do. So, does your organization acknowledge that, and then what does it do to offset it and to help people again as the antidote to burnout?
Mm-hmm. Good question, or a good way of framing it, rather. Let's see.
Karen Easter wrote, "We have always been flexible with scheduling. Workers collaborate with each other to do it." Okay.
Oh, that's very nice.
flexible schedules is, and the fact that they do it themselves is great. That means there's a lot of trust, that you have a lot of trust in your workforce that, that they can do it, and you're always going to have the coverage that you need. That's tremendous. Anything else?
I
Karen
knew
says,
someone, oh, go ahead.
Karen says, we have always been flexible with scheduling. Okay. I have really encouraged all our staff, paid and unpaid, to take time off. Very important.
Absolutely. And it's important to have those mental health days, sick days, vacation days, especially in our field. I worked once with someone who told me that they came from an organization that once a week they had like 45 minutes scheduled into their week where they could just sort of like hang out, like a coffee clutch kind of thing. And they could hang out and they could complain about whatever they wanted to and sort of get it all out and be done with it for the week and put it away before the weekend started, because that used to be what they did every Friday, which I thought was kind of interesting. I've personally worked at places where we did, you know, like Zumba on it, you know, they would stay open one night a week and we could do yoga or Zumba or Weight Watchers or those kinds of things to help staff sort of de-stress a little and decompress a little. So those are just some examples. Thank you for sharing your examples. Let's see. We have workers who are very seldom sick. We have somebody typing, Karen typing in. They volunteer. They actually, oh wow, virtually never call in sick. That's great. So I began to encourage them to call in well. I like that.
That's nice.
If there was nothing heavy on their schedule that day. That's actually really nice. That's really nice. Just to take a day to themselves, right?
Yeah, there used to be, I haven't seen it in a while. There were, there were sick days, and then there was something called personal
days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody thought about that was important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's, and then there's sort of a kind of sometimes wellness can be as simple as asking somebody how they are, or asking somebody if they're aware that a family member is ill, or that there's a particular thing going on in the person's life that the person has shared, of course. That wellness is sometimes just asking somebody how they are, or just acknowledging a person in a way that makes them feel important, or that makes them feel valued. So wellness takes a lot of different forms, and there's spiritual wellness, and there's emotional wellness, and physical wellness. And so again, it's really incumbent on an organization that wants to be healthy to have a plan in place, a strategy in place, a deliberate strategy in place that involves all levels of the organization to pay attention to the wellness. And sometimes it's also training supervisors to pick up on unwellness in their workforce, and then to address it early, and then to deliver and provide that flexibility and that compassion. And we're talking more and more and more about compassionate supervision, and we're talking more and more about trauma-informed supervision. So there's a lot that goes into it. Some of it is kind of obvious and glaring, and some of it is just more subtle and soft, and has to do with good human relations.
And I think that also brings us into workforce development, right? So skill acquisition. So what is it that your staff needs, right? What is it that your staff needs to do a really good job? And not even just to give them the skills they need to do a good job, but what can you do to help them sort of advance their careers, right? So that they don't remain stagnant. I mean, it's really nice to sort of have really a good workforce that does their job and does their job quite well. But over time, that can get a little bit old, and you want to make sure that you're sort of giving the staff, I should say, all of the skills that they could possibly get from you. Give them as much training as you can give them as much, opportunity for advancement, help them sort of really shine and groom them for something else if you can. You also want to talk about, feedback. How do you get feedback from your employees? Is it, is the first time they're hearing about an issue on their annual evaluation, performance evaluation, or are you constantly giving feedback to your workforce? And what mechanisms do you have in place, or what platforms do you have in place to get feedback from your employees? Most of the time, really good ideas to solve problems come from the staff that are doing the work, not from supervisors or supervisors, right? Because they have the firsthand knowledge. So what are you doing to encourage that feedback and encourage that innovation? Eve, you actually had a really good example of that the other day when we did this training somewhere else for a different region. Do you remember about your the problem solving? The problem solving. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think
like a contest it was, right?
Well, this was a very, very kind of, I thought, clever way of bringing the workforce in to the operation to kind of address an operational problem, and we offered money, as a reward to solve a particular problem, and we put it out there for the workforce to come back to us with solutions. We gave them a certain amount of time. There were dates. There was a kind of a deadline, and we said we would reward the employee whose feedback we actually implemented into an action to address the problem. So it had to, not only did it have to be sort of a good idea, but it had to be an implementable idea that we were actually able to put in place. And it was great because it started a kind of communicated to the staff that we valued their creativity. We valued their problem-solving skills. So, we used that a number of times in the organization, and it proved to be a very sort of morale builder also. We found that, people were more energized because, it was really very nice for people to feel that, things that they recommended became part of the way the organization operated. And so, it really was in as much as it was the feedback, and morale, but it also, created a lot of loyalty to the organization, which I think is an important part of morale. But I want to give an analogy in terms of this idea of skills acquisition. And I mean, think about it this way. Think about, if you are given if you're in the carpentry business and you give one of your employees a job to screw a bookcase into the wall, but you don't give them a screwdriver. And then at the end of the day, you go to evaluate their job and it's terrible because they basically had to use their thumbnail to get the screw in. And of course, it's not a good job. And then you criticize them for not doing the job well. Well, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. We're talking about knowing what is your staff facing every day, and what kind of skills do they need so that they can be proud and they can be kind of gratified with their work. If you have a workforce that doesn't have the skills, but you're sending them out there to do a job, and they're constantly struggling and they're constantly frustrated because they don't have the skill to do that job, you've got sort of the primary cause of burnout. Because eventually a job that's not gratifying and remember that here we are, a lot of people who work in our field are not there for the money because the money is not usually that competitive, but they're there for some sort of satisfaction that they're actually successful at helping people live better lives or whatever it is. And if they don't have the skills to achieve that, then they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. They have this directive, but they can't fulfill it because they don't have the skills to do that.
And then the last thing that we wanted to just mention and touch on as far as maintaining organizational culture that's resilient and healthy is that HR really needs to be that filter for ensuring that internal communication is consistent with the organization's culture. So what do we mean by that? What is the language that's being used and how is that consistent, right? What are we showing people? I'll give you an example. You know, if you have a supervisor who's constantly raising their voice and yelling and using non-recovery oriented language, like this person is stupid, get them out of the program, move them out, you know, it's not okay, because what happens is it's not aligned with the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And then everybody else sort of starts to feel weighed down by that. And then you'll see, you know, over time, the workforce really just starts to feel disempowered, I think.
Yeah.
And they won't want to come to work. They don't want to come to work and be in an environment like that. And I don't really blame them. Everything that we've talked about so far is really about how do you engage your staff? How do you keep them, how do you get them in the door, and how do you keep them happy, right? What were you going to say, Eve?
No, you know, that's exactly it. It's that this, you know, this stuff doesn't happen without giving these things thought and being very intentional around these issues. You know, I know, you know, that everybody gets to, you know, focus on the work and the operations on a day-to-day basis, but there needs to be, and very often it is the job of the human resources department to kind of have a broad view of the organization, have the data that informs them, and then, you know, has an intentional approach to making sure that everything that we're talking about is in place, and that the workforce isn't. Look, at the end of the day, all our organizations are nothing without our workforce. It's our workforce that's out there doing the job. So if we don't focus there, if we don't put a lot of, you know, energy there, we're basically not, you know, fueling our own success.
Right, that's absolutely right. Any questions or comments before we move to the next section on resources? Okay, so let's see, we are running a little low on time, so we're probably not going to get through, and there's a lot of information in the slide deck, and we sort of did that on purpose. So you'll have the decks, they'll be posted on the website, on the CTAC or MCTAC website. But we wanted you to have a lot of information, whether we got to all of it or just some of it. So the next section is around the tools and resources. So we mentioned earlier that ICL put this workforce priorities webinar series together, and we hope that you've been able to look at some of those and participate in some of those webinars. They're absolutely fantastic. And if you haven't, they are available. You can view them. You can view the recordings at ctacny.org.
Yeah,
but
it was
in
just
addition
put
to
into
those,
the chat box.
perfect.
McTack just put
Tara
it,
typed
Tara
it.
just typed it into the chat box.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So there's the link to the whole series. There's one page where you can just click on everything, you know, and sort of go through it at your own leisure. But in addition to the actual webinars, there's also been some resources and some tools. So this is a list of some of them. There are others that are actually still in development, and there's another webinar for October, and we'll get to that at the end. We'll put that information up for you as well, so you can register for that. But lots of things, including sample job descriptions and something called interview guide. So we're going to spend a little bit of time sort of going through those things with you today. So the interview guide is basically, there are 3 interview guides. One is on integrated health or whole health, one is on trauma-informed practices, and the other is on recovery orientation and person-centered care. So each of those interview guides gives you a list of questions and questions that you can use when you're looking to hire staff, things that will help you sort of elicit answers to understand someone's orientation in those areas. And then there's also a list of questions that are geared specifically towards hiring supervisors and what their beliefs are in those areas. So Eve, integrated health is kind of your thing. So do you want to go through this slide?
Yeah, just very quickly, what we're looking for when we bring an employee, a prospective employee, when we're doing the interview phase of bringing somebody on board, we want to see how well versed they are in particular areas. And integrated health is that, how, and let me just say this, sometimes it's not so much that they have a tremendous amount of experience in integrated health, because, that might be, it might not be. What you want to really do is ask questions that let you know that the person understands what that is and believes that it's valuable, and gives you a sense that when you do hire them, they will work in a way that addresses whole person health. So integrated health is really looking at a person, at a human being, not in terms of only one part of their identity or one part of their functioning. So we might be behavioral health professional, whether it's mental health or substance use disorders, fine. But we have to acknowledge that the person also has a body, and that they may have an illness, or they may be social determinants of health that impact their lives and their well-being. And, from the perspective of behavioral health, it's kind of looking at chronic disease and integrating that in the care plan, so that you're as equally interested in the person's emotional well-being as you are in the person's physical well-being. And on the medical side, by the way, that's happening more and more, in that medical practices are now screening people for depression and anxiety, because they know if they don't do that, and if a person is depressed, they're much less likely to follow up on their medical regimens. So for a long time, medicine and behavioral health were kind of separated by this wall. And now we're kind of realizing that in order to optimize people's lives and their well-being, is that we have to kind of merge those two, so that there's, no matter what door the person, what threshold the person crosses, the whole person, the whole entity of who they are, is going to get attention and is going to get support. So you want to know, and these questions, these interview questions, give you a clue that the person you're interviewing values that, understands that, and gives you a sense that if you do hire them, they're going to do their work with that understanding, and with skills that you might be able to teach them, but nevertheless that they have the interest, and they have a perspective that supports an integrated approach to healthcare.
Right. It's like we used to always say, if you're going to a behavioral health organization, back in the day when I first started this field, it wasn't, it was only from like the neck up. And if you had problems from the neck down, you went to a medical doctor, not a social worker. And, we don't think that way anymore, right? That's a really old way of thinking about things. And now it's looking at somebody's whole health and understanding that physical health has an impact on behavioral health, and vice versa, really, right?
Right. And it's not that you're expected as a social worker to do surgery, but you are expected to find out to help the person make choices, informed choices about what to pursue in terms of treatment for a particular disorder. And then if they have that treatment, to know enough about the illness to support their convalescence, or to support their maintenance, and to support their following their doctor's regimens. So you're really there, and as much as you may help them manage their relationships with their significant others, you're also helping them manage their health, so that they can function optimally as whole human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other one we wanted to touch on was the recovery-focused and person-centered care interview guide. So this one obviously focuses on those two things, eliciting answers and getting information from prospective employees around someone's recovery orientation. Do they believe in recovery? Do they think that people have the ability to recover and move past an illness, for example? Are they able to share power, right? Are they able to say, an individual with a behavioral health condition has the capacity to make decisions and has the ability to be an expert in their own care and listen to their story and walk, I always say walk with them and not ahead of them, walk together in the journey towards recovery. So that's what this interview guide is about. And then there's also one on trauma-informed care. So we're going to open it up for question, or we actually have a question for you all now. So how do you think that these questions, these interview guides, would potentially help you to recruit or hire employees who share your organization's beliefs and practices around whole health or in general, beliefs and practices in general? Let us know what your thinking is. Let us know, if this doesn't apply to you because you're not hiring employees or you're not recruiting employees. What does it make you think about your practice in general, right? And how you work with individuals in general. So remember, you can use the chat, you can unmute yourselves. There's different ways for you guys to sort of share your opinions.
I'm going to say something here, and maybe it'll help people to kind of think about this as well. We talked about alignment earlier, and one of the reasons, we want to ask certain questions, and one of the reasons these interview tools are useful is because, in a sense, if we use these questions to elicit people's perspectives and feelings and ideas around what our values are as an organization, and we hire people who respond in a way that leads us to believe that they're going to support our mission and our values in their work, then we're more likely to end up with a workforce that's aligned. We're more likely to end up with a workforce where everyone has a basic foundation and belief system. That is crucial when you're trying then to face a crisis effectively, because then there's a shared set of beliefs, and there's a shared set of approaches. And so when push comes to shove and there's a quick decision that has to be made, you don't have to then start training people, or you don't have to then start providing detailed guidance. Everybody kind of gets it because everybody has that foundation to begin with. And so all of these things that, beginning from the interview to the actual hiring to having a job description that really reflects what the job is, the whole thing then comes together so that in a crisis, the organization is going to be resilient, it's going to be able to act effectively, and then the sustainability, it's almost like we're also talking about not only, responding to crisis, but we're talking about organizational sustainability over time. A healthy and resilient organization is also a sustainable organization.
Absolutely.
And
you may also want to, go ahead.
This is Karen again. There was a very important study of crisis hotlines that did suicide work that resulted in some published research. It was called the Silent Listening Study. And the listeners at the University of Quebec at Montreal tapped into 12 hotlines for a year. They had a lot of information about each helper, and they also used their own judgment about what they were hearing. And they came up with 3 things that were the most important qualities for the helpers in crisis situations. These were personal qualities. Their feelings were that three personal qualities. Did the listener have respect for the caller? Did the listener show empathy for the caller? And was the listener easy to talk to about hard things? And our challenge in trying to implement that information has, of course, always been figuring out what kinds of questions we can ask that would allow us to see what we would think about each person's empathy and respect for other people. So I really liked your questions about, do you believe recovery versus treatment? That would be a great question to have the chance to either show or not show respect and empathy, I think.
Yeah, and if you take a look at those guides, I mean, they're literally 2 pages for each topic of questions. So you'll be able to, I think it'll be a really good tool for you, and you'll be able to, get lots of info and lots of questions that you could use and adapt to your own setting when you're trying to hire employees or volunteers.
Well, I also think actually, Karen, I don't know, you kind of raised your hand or wanted to speak before this slide came up, but those 3 things that you mentioned were found in that study are actually these soft skills that we're talking about.
Right there.
And they're hard to get at in an interview. They're not easy to get at. But I think that they are. I think that you do. It is important to kind of ask questions and conduct an interview in a way where you're able to see whether the individual in the interview has these characteristics.
Right.
And sometimes you could ask, what I like to do generally is I like to do kind of what I call situational, give people
scenario-based.
Scenario-based, and say, okay, so this is the situation. What would you do? And sometimes what I do is I actually put it on a sheet of paper and have the person write it out. So what would you do? Step 1, stepwise, what would you do faced with this situation?
I do the same thing, and actually I do it for a couple of reasons. And one is to get a writing sample, because I feel like that's also really important, no matter like what someone's education level is, what their experience is. I've been caught out there enough to know that it's always okay to ask for a writing sample, and I get them to do it on the spot so that it's really a representation of how they would perhaps document collaboratively, for example.
Yeah.
So we're running low on time, so I'm going to run us ahead a little bit. The last thing we wanted to sort of mention to you was about job descriptions. So I think that this slide is probably the most representative of the last 3. So, it's really important to use language that aligns, again, is consistent with your mission, vision, and values, that you're advertising for positions, and you're using language that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Representative of who you're trying to bring in, who you're trying to recruit, right? And that it also matches with your organization's, recovery principles, your organization's, your mission. So use words that are person-centered, recovery-oriented, that reinforce that participants are driving the services, not vice versa, not the staff. But the key takeaway here is really to ensure that the position you're hiring for is the job that you're posting for, and that the job responsibilities align with the work and the mission, vision, and values of your organization. Because that's how you're going to get the right person in the door, right? That's how you're going to get the quote unquote right fit for that job.
Let me put it to you this way, guys. If you haven't looked at your job descriptions in the last year, you should take a look.
Take the time, Take the time. It's really important. I mean, listen, I think we all sort of, it happens to all of us, right? We're in positions and we're, usually not updating job descriptions until it's time to fill that position again. But over time, things evolve, positions change. So it's really important to just kind of keep an eye on that.
I mean, one thing that I know won't be in any job descriptions is ability to work virtually in care delivery. because
or to deliver services
right,
remotely.
virtually. So that's going to be an important feature now, because Zoom and WebEx are not going away.
Right. That's right. Absolutely right. All right. So we have 2 minutes left. We want to open it up to you guys again. What's something that you would consider as your organization's top priority as far as addressing health and resilience in your organization? Also, any comments, any questions for us? This is sort of your opportunity for that. We do have a few minutes left, so we wanted to hear from you. And we hope we've been helpful for you today. We hope you've been able to take one of those 3 learning objectives away that, with you away today that we started talking about at the beginning of our meeting today. Anybody want to share maybe a top priority as far as addressing health and resilience, or as far as maybe just share a little bit about starting to think about health and resilience or culture in their organization from today? Something that stood out for you? Okay.
Okay.
Well, we hope you've gotten some good information from us today. Eve, there's something in the chat box if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, she wrote, Karen said, I don't want to be the only one talking. Karen,
all good, Karen.
we get it. And Karen, thank
good.
you very much. You've got us thinking too today, and thank you for sharing your stories. And I'm sure other people, sometimes you just can't sort of respond in the moment, but our hope is that, this has been helpful in some way, at least in getting you to think about culture, and at least in getting you to think about, how your organization sort of operates to maintain its own health and resilience.
Absolutely. And there are a couple of things coming up in the series, still in the workforce series. So employee engagement is the next webinar, and that's happening on October 1st. So feel free to register for that at ctechny.org. And then also October 15th, the pre-employment screening tool package will be available. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We appreciate, we're happy to also entertain questions. If you have any, we can also get back to you if something comes up later on.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Yep.
And be well. We'll see you soon, hopefully.